Chip Tam and football. That's what Pittsburgh does. Hey, everybody. I'm Brian Batko, one of our Steelers reporters at the Post-Gazette. Thanks for coming back to the show, or thanks for joining for if it's the first time. If that's the case, thank you. We appreciate it. I'm going to be joined today by John Middlekauff, former NFL scout. Now he hosts his own 3 and Out podcast. You can hear him pretty often on the Colin Cowherd show. That may be where I came across him. He also used to do some writing. Yeah, it should be a fun conversation. Looking forward to getting his perspective on the Steelers, the draft, generally talking some football. We will see where that discussion goes. And this discussion will be brought to you by Pella. There's no better place to get new windows and doors installed in your home than Pella. They can help you save on your energy costs year round. It's really cold today, Tuesday, February 18th here in Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania. I was freezing through my hoodie this morning, dropping my son off at school. So yes, absolutely schedule a free in-home consultation with your local Pella windows and doors to find the right product for your home and budget. If you need to get some of that done, give them a call at 866-593-1560 to get started planning your new windows and doors installation with Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. That's 866-593-1560 to discuss your project further. Now we are going to discuss further with John Middlekauff on the other side. All right, now we bring in our guest for this week, John Middlekauff. Spent some time scouting in the NFL with the Eagles, and now he's in the media world. Really sharp guy, really savvy, knows his stuff, and he's entertaining. So thanks for coming on, John, to talk some Steelers. How you doing?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing great. It never ends here in Pittsburgh. It's Steelers town year-round, 24/7. I'll just start with this for you. Get kind of your perspective on it. If Art Rooney II came to you tomorrow and said, "All right, you're going to run the team this offseason," I assume everything would have to start with the quarterback position. Now that Russell Wilson and Justin Fields are free agents, what direction would you take it? And I didn't necessarily plan this when I reached out to you, but the timing's great because I just listened to what you had to say about Aaron Rodgers and Matthew Stafford and how it seems like fewer and fewer teams might be willing to go down this veteran QB route. It's just not working for anybody lately.
Well, it kind of hit me, Rodgers, when was that? Like Friday when the Jets put out the release of thank you for your efforts. See you later.
But also, obviously, please make us look stupid the next team that you go to.
the Cousins thing was a complete disaster. And I think listen, I'm 40 years old. For most of my life, I would just say athletes in general, by the time they got to their mid-30s, fell off a cliff. Now, clearly things have changed with health and, training. But Tom Brady is an outlier.
Yeah.
You saw it with Roethlisberger. We saw it with Breeze. And we saw it with Peyton Manning. Once they got that 37, 38, 39, they both had a precipitous drop on an individual year. It's like, whoa. And I think lately, because the quarterback inflation, I've been talking about this for a long time, of kind of that run of Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, everyone swung for that. It's why I thought it was insane when the Patriots took Mac Jones 15th overall. And then I think it was the next year, the Steelers took Kenny Pickett 20th overall. To me, historically, those guys were in the Cousins mold. And not that long ago, guys like Cousins went on day 3.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got all out of whack. But at least when you draft a quarterback like Kenny Pickett, you're not in for that much money. When you sign Kirk Cousins to $100 million guaranteed, that impacts you pretty greatly. When you trade and make a huge swing for Aaron Rodgers and the Stafford thing, and look at what all those have in common. The Packers, I don't know, one of the best run operations in American business. Kevin O'Connell, who I think is a little overhyped. Let's win a playoff game before we anoint you as Bill Walsh. But he's clearly pretty good.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if it was all his say, but he's they were out of the Cousins business. And now potentially the Rams are yeah, we're kind of out of the Stafford business. I don't know how big you are into baseball, but I lived in the Bay Area for a long time. And anyone doing a deal with Billy Beane, it's you guys are going to eventually lose this. And if he wants your prospects, because it's usually he doesn't want the number 1 overall prospect. It was he wants the 7th, the 15th, and the 18th. It's I'd hold on to those guys. And I just think that when these guys are selling these quarterbacks, like, stay away. And I think the Steelers, and listen, I'm not trying to beat a dead horse. I've been talking about this for a while. I was in Philadelphia when Andy Reid got fired. And at the time, I mean, we had just won 4 games. So it wasn't like out of left field. But change is clearly the best thing that ever happened to the guy, right? Because he was clearly really good. And he's gone on to be what I would consider the modern day kind of chubbier version of Bill Walsh, the offensive genius, who is just people are going to be talking about for a long time in terms of offensive innovation and obviously his resume. But the number one thing he did when he left, he got a fresh start and he got to kind of change, like, I'm not going to be the GM, because he was the GM when I was there, even though Howie technically had the GM title. And since then, John Dorsey and Brett Veach, like, they've picked the players. And from the jump, obviously, they've improved greatly once they hit on the Mahomes pick, but they were really good with Alex Smith. And their team, I would say, was better than, this current version of the Steelers, right?
Yeah, more talent around it. They built up the roster for sure.
Exactly. So it's like when I always thought, like, the Tomlin thing has kind of run its course. And it's be healthy for him. He could have gone over the last couple of years. He would have been the number one candidate like every year. Look at Vrabel. It's like everyone was lined up. Well, they would do the same thing for Mike Tomlin. But that's clearly, I'm done talking about it because it's just not going to to
Yeah, it's February 18th now. Like they're not going that direction.
But I even mean just in general.
Like,
but yeah, I just think it's a dead topic. Like until it happens, then I will react to it. But it's not. It's just stupid because I don't believe it's going to happen now. As long as they win their 9-10 games, get routed in the first round, which is crazy. Like when I really grew up on football, one just in like the late 90s with like the Levon Kirk, just how tough and physical the Steelers were to what they became with rivalry. Yeah, it was just with even through the early Tomlin days to what they are now. It's just like this notion that, well, they never lose. Well, yeah, they're a well-run operation and they have a good coach. They're not going to lose. Like they're never going to be like on an individual season like the Jags. But like this sucks. We all know like they've played the last 2 years. Think about the Ravens and the Bills, who are the second tier, who can never beat the Chiefs, and they have gotten curb stomped. Like, just beat by multiple touchdowns, and never in the game did you think they were going to win. It wasn't curb stomping might be a little strong, but
I think a lot of people are nodding their heads right along
this year
with
for sure.
Yes. Yeah.
This year for sure. Last year with the Bills, kind of a weird game, but it's
they
like
they clawed back a little, but yeah, regardless, you're right. It wasn't competitive, and you even go back to before that, the Browns ran them out on a rail, then second to last year, and the Chiefs the following season. So yeah, they haven't.
We know they're not as good as them, and then you got to factor in Jim Harbaugh and Sean Payton are coming. Like this is going to be that was probably their worst teams, and the Texans, like their division kind of sucks, and they're solid. Like they're not going anywhere. So it's like, okay, what do? Do we sign Aaron Rodgers? Like, I wouldn't blame them if they did that. Like, what are your options? And to pay not Cousins, but Darnold. And I'm a Darnold guy, but those last couple games got to rattle you. I mean, it's like I wouldn't even feel as confident. Like, I give a lot of credit to Baker Mayfield. I don't know if it's he had a baby, he matured, he slimmed down, but to me, he looks dramatically better than even the good year. Like to me, he's just a bona fide top 10 quarterback and has games where it's like, this guy's like a top 4 or 5 quarterback in the NFL. And he got $100 million, right? And that's probably for any guy not on his rookie contract, you could consider the best contract in the NFL when you factor in a guy that's like a Pro Bowl level guy, making half as much as other guys who can throw you 40 touchdowns. So I don't know if I could do that with Sam Darnold, but like that's who we're talking about. And I just think you kind of find yourself in the same world of where they've been. And look at, like, honestly, it was impressive what they did last offseason. I give them credit. You know better than me the dynamics of a local guy, but Kenny Pickett just isn't that good. So you have to pivot off him, and they were lucky that the Russell Wilson, Justin Fields situation for no money. But like anytime you just have, we got 2 quarterbacks who are really cheap that we don't really love. Like that's not a great situation. So I don't know, man. I mean, defensively, I know just the individual injuries probably better than me off the top of my head, but they had some injuries, but their defense fell off a cliff. I mean,
it did. It also, I mean, they faced tougher offenses for sure.
Yeah.
But still, they underachieved in a big way.
They were getting shredded.
The Patrick Queen acquisition didn't really elevate them from inside linebacker the way a lot of Steelers fans hoped it would. But I think you made a great point there, John. Is like
Would you
talking
say
about all
TJ's been banged up a little bit?
Yeah, I mean he doesn't complain about it, but also schematically, they probably need to move him around a little bit more to try to just punch back and counter what teams are doing to him to try to take him out of the game week in and week out now. But I thought you made a great point that we're looking at all these QB options this year, and then that's what everyone's been discussing ad nauseum here in Pittsburgh since the end of the season, because the Steelers set themselves up for this situation, unfortunately. But last year, too, kind of a similar deal. Like they're seeing the Kirk Cousins thing happen. They're seeing the wishy-washy what's going to go on with Aaron Rodgers coming off that injury. And it almost seems like Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin and company were like, we don't know what's really going to work. But at the very least, and hey, we're skeptical that a 35 and older Russell Wilson and that path ever works for anybody lately. We're skeptical that the first-round cast-offs like Justin Fields work out for anybody in the long term. Baker's one example to the counter, but at least we know these guys are cheap and good values, and we'll see what happens. Well, now I think a lot of Steelers fans that I talk to and hear from, readers and listeners, they're willing to say, hey, let's just run it back with Justin Fields, give him a 1 or 2 year deal and see if he can still put it all together.
I've seen a lot of headlines and people discussing the bringing back Justin Fields, as you alluded to. My question is this: from the outside, I get where the discussion comes from, but let's put ourselves in the shoes of everyone involved with the Steelers, from Tomlin to Arthur Smith to just the organization. Why would you re-sign a guy that you wouldn't play for a quarterback who was okay early, but let's face it, as it got cold, Russell looked like a shell of himself, and they would not play him. And there is no coaching turnover here, right? The head coach and the offensive coordinator are still there. So to me, just having been around NFL coaches for a long time, that one, I know it's a sexy thing to say, and he's a polarizing guy that has a lot of defenders despite some struggles. And then this year legitimately just didn't play after they inputted Russell back in, which early on looked like the bold right move. But then as the season went on, it's like, why don't they just give the other guy a chance to run around? These lollipop throws aren't working. Why would they be incentivized to go, well, we'll just do it now. We'll see. Like, I wouldn't. Now, I get from a price standpoint, maybe you can just get him for 1 year, $3 or $4 million. So you just bring him in and then keep figuring it out, which I would understand. He knows your terminology, knows your players. You know him. Clearly, you know better than me, but by all accounts, really good guy.
Yeah.
I thought handled everything really well given the circumstances. Having Russell, it's not the easiest guy, just the hoopla that comes with that. And it's a lot more hoopla than substance behind it now. But why would they want him from a player standpoint when he couldn't crack the field when their quarterback? I thought Russell down the stretch as it got cold looked pretty average at best. I mean, below average, a lot of it, to be honest with you.
Big factor in the discourse there, John, here is it seems like, kind of reading the tea leaves, Arthur Smith was pro Fields all along, and Mike Tomlin was kind of the guy who said, no, we need to just see, we owe it to ourselves to see if Russell Wilson can elevate. And basically, I mean, kind of a typical stubborn Tomlin move by the end, right? He's like, okay, this is going great. I'm being celebrated around the league as potential coach of the year now for turning to the veteran when we were 4-2. So we got to roll with him essentially. And then, you get to the end of the season, there's less margin for error. And it's like, okay, 1 or 2 or 3 games left. You really feel comfortable going back to Fields now. I think that would be kind of the logic to it. I get what you're saying, that it's not like there's a new OC coming in here or a new GM, and certainly no new head coach, but more so that they pressed the way I've been phrasing it is, I feel like they pressed pause on the Fields thing more than they just straight up rejected him. But that's kind of what it's maybe the best of a lot of, like we've discussed here, uninspiring options at this point. It doesn't seem like the draft is the answer. It would feel like it'd be a Kenny Pickett 2022 redux if they go that route.
And the best thing to get a Kenny Pickett or, the Niners struck gold with Brock Purdy is to do it in like the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round. Yeah. So there isn't pressure on anybody, and you could just, if the cream rises, the cream rises. But when you draft a guy, part of the Mac Jones, Kenny Pickett, when you take a guy that high, you don't have a choice. Like, he has to be your starter. And then he gets judged, fair or not, to like Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen and Joe Burrow. I mean, that's, when you're just a starter first rounder, whether you're picked 7 or pick 15. Like, that's just how you're talked about. And kind of, what was Kenny, 20?
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I just
first
think,
off the board in that class, but we all know what that class was looked at the time and what they've turned out to be to this point, except for
was
Brock
Will
Purdy,
Levis in that
ironically.
class?
No, that was Kenny Pickett, Desmond Ridder, Malik
Oh.
Willis, Sam Howell, Matt Corral,
Okay.
and then, yes, Brock Purdy checking in as Mr. Irrelevant.
And I think that's the hard part about, someone asked me recently about why CEO head coaches, don't get more jobs and why these coordinators always do. And I think quarterbacks and coaches, when you think about like interviewing them in the draft process or interviewing them in the coaching process, it's hard to quantify, how smart Brock Purdy is, or just how, innate his instincts are playing the position, or just like, how fast the other guys will gravitate toward him. I mean, like, you can quantify stuff with Jalen Hurts, right? How strong he is, how good of a runner he is. But a lot of what he brings to the table is clearly like, this is a serious cat. Like, this guy barely even smiles. It took them winning the Super Bowl to get a smile on his face. And there's, I think same thing with coaches, where it's like, if you knew a guy was going to be a leader like Mike Tomlin, yeah, more guys, but it's easier to quantify. Like, Ben Johnson's offense has been number one the last couple of years. And that's back to the conversation about the quarterbacks. Like, the one thing you can quantify is like making a move, let's say, for Matt Stafford. One, the Rams aren't just giving him to you, even if they're over him. He still has value. So you got to give a second-day pick. And then you probably got to throw, I don't know, I'm just going to guess, $50 million guaranteed just immediately to make him happy. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is the year it falls off a cliff. And you're like, oh, we're screwed. And that's where, like, to me, if he's available, is the guy that makes the most sense. But we just have two recent examples of two older players falling off a cliff and the team regretting it immediately. And the other thing with Stafford is, like, I've seen Stafford, without Sean McVay in the prime of his career and it not go well. And I don't know, like, the one thing with the Steelers, I think you can get cocky when you take these flyers on these wide receivers and you hit on some, and you hit on Antonio Brown, who's the best version of the whole crew, right? His 6-year run is like historic. But like, I'm watching the guy that they got now. It's like, yeah, I get he's physically gifted and makes some sweet plays, but would I depend on this guy in a huge game against the Ravens, the Chiefs, the Bengals with, like, in November, December? No chance. And, they kind of walk this line with guys like this where they're hard on them, but they really need them. So I think they find themselves in these weird positions sometimes with these players, which is weird because, like, when I close my eyes and I think the Steelers, I think like TJ Watt, Minka Fitzpatrick, Cam Hayward. Like, I want to go to war with those guys. Yeah. And then their whole season depends on this, like, diva wide receiver being into the game.
Like zooming out on the receiver market, John, I'm curious about this. Like, I'm not saying they're about to be the next running backs and they're going to get completely devalued and there's some receiver bubble here, but it just seems like every year now coming out of college, we're talking about these special prospects. And now not even coming out of college yet, but in 2 or 3 years, Ryan Williams and Jeremiah Smith from Alabama and Ohio State. Like, I just keep asking myself, if everyone is special, who actually is special? And do you need to bend over backwards to placate a guy like George Pickens? Or can you just say, all right, you cause opposing teams headaches, but you also cause us headaches, so we're going to go ahead and move on? Like, I just think it's a really fascinating position value-wise and drafting and scouting-wise right now in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Niners are a good example. Is their two guys, Debo and Ayuk, who they both paid, were like proven winning players. Like, in the biggest games, you go to war with them and win with them, and they could have you on the brink of a Super Bowl championship if you just called a couple better plays. And I think they kind of regret, like, God, should we have just traded Ayuk last year before the draft? And we need
the
to
Steelers, maybe.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, they would have driven Ayuk to the airport for Amari Cooper in a second. They love that, but Ayuk's like, no, I'm not going there. But the point is, it's like, you get Ricky Pearsall, who by the end of the season, you're like, oh, this guy could just catch you probably 70 balls next year. You get Jawan Jennings. And I think the Niners, like the Steelers, they ultimately don't want to have like 3 guys catching 100 balls. So they don't even want to play like that.
Yeah.
So I think financially, listen, the Chiefs have won a lot of games by having a smart quarterback. Like, the Mahomes, the sexy Mahomes, hasn't really happened the last couple of years. he has played much more like an older, like Peyton Manning, playing smart, not turning the ball over, just making timely plays, making clutch plays in the fourth quarter, and big-time defense. And this year their offensive line was bad, but like
winning games 23-20, 24-21, because the other team just screws it up and you don't. Yeah.
I just think I give Travis Hunter a lot of credit. Like, you'll get lost in the shuffle as a wide receiver. You're not a top 5 pick just as a wide receiver alone because, one, you're not the wide receiver prospect of Malik Neighbors, and there are other just wide receivers in every draft where it's easy to justify, well, I'll go O-line, I'll go D-line. But when you play corner, it's like, oh, this guy could be a lockdown corner. Well, I like you a lot more then. So, yeah, I'm with you on the wide receiver thing. There is a small percentage. That was my issue with the Niners paying Ayuk. It's like you're paying him not quite the same guaranteed money, but on a yearly basis, like he's CeeDee Lamb or Jamar Chase. And one, he's not those guys. And two, you don't build your offense like that. So allocating the resources doesn't make sense. And I think you got to be very, very careful on how you do that. And I think that's why I think I understand why Joe is so outspoken about this offseason. But I do think the Bengals,
Joe Burrow,
Joe Burrow, that being like, do I want to give T. Higgins $100 million on top of giving Jamar Chase $150 million? Like, is that the best way to build a team? I don't know.
It's like these, studs.
If I'm the Steelers, I'm rooting for that.
Okay. Yeah. I think a lot of Steelers fans are rooting for them to, try to bid the highest for T. Higgins if he even hits the open market. But yeah, I mean, that's not realistic at this point. And
the reality is, as long as they, the Steelers are a better operation, obviously, but as long as they got Joe Burrow, like, you guys aren't the same. That's and Steeler fans aren't dumb. Like, they understand that. Like, how do you compete in a division with Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson? It's like forever. It's like, how do the Browns and stuff compete with you with Ben Roethlisberger? They don't.
They're water until they find that QB of their own, which obviously is easier said than done. And everyone's trying to do it, save for 10 teams at this point. So,
I mean, if they played that season 10 times, how often do the Bengals not make the playoffs?
And they nearly did by the end. They even beat the Steelers by the end. The weird thing is the Steelers beating them in Cincy with Russ throwing for 400 plus yards and a bunch of touchdowns is like the loss that kept them out too. But that was
the Bengals defense was so atrocious that first half of the season. I think that was the first month when they lost to the Ravens in like the game of the year. They had multiple double-digit leads in the fourth quarter that they blew.
Yeah,
I think they win that game 90% of the time.
To your point, if they keep paying, 4 to 5 guys on the roster, 90% of their cap, they better hit on some D linemen and edge rushers and defensive backs in the draft and get some value in free agency. But yeah, it's the AFC is a tough place to be right now, especially if you don't have a QB.
I wouldn't even just say the AFC. I think the AFC North.
Yeah.
I mean, the Ravens, I know they can't beat the Chiefs and they lost the Bills in the playoffs, but clearly are, the cream of the crop organization, the team, like, they're going nowhere. You have the Browns, who are a mess because of the Watson contract, but like, they obviously have a solid coach and a well-run general manager. Like, the talent on their team, like, they are really, really tough to play. And they're just going to knock off, even if they're not a playoff team, they're going to win a couple division games every year. Now, is that going to be against the Steelers? Is that going to be against the Ravens? But they're going to do it. And the Bengals just, I mean, they got a quarterback in the peak of his powers who's like, I mean, I don't know. People love to push back on him. It's like, guys, you just watch him play. I mean, he's remarkable.
Yeah. I mean, Steelers fans see him
and Jamar Chase is like the modern day like Jerry Rice right now. I mean, he looks.
Yeah, I don't hear too many of my audience like negging Joe Burrow. Really, I think they're all kind of understanding that it's going to be hell to have him in the division for the next 10 years or however long he plays with that wrist issue.
What pick is the Steelers?
20. They're you can always set your clock to them being 21. Between 20 and 24, basically. So 21, and a lot of people were thinking maybe wide receiver because of the George Pickens drama and distractions. A lot of people thinking D line because of what they saw the Eagles do. Let's end on this, John, because I don't want to keep you here too long. But we had these conversations on this show and other ones from the Post-Gazette, like right after the Super Bowl, that whole week. Why are the Eagles so much better than the Steelers? Like, what's kind of the elevator explanation for that right now? from your perspective, having
Well, I think from
been
an
inside of it,
organizational
yeah.
standpoint, no, I mean, no one's. If you had a draft, Tomlin would go ahead of Sirianni and Doug. But I think they've proven that both those guys, I mean, one guy won the first Super Bowl in franchise history, and the other guy makes the playoffs every single year like Tomlin, and has now gone to 2 Super Bowls in 3 years and won one, and honestly could have won both of them.
Yeah.
Is they are just not afraid to make changes and kind of keep everyone on edge. So I would say that I've never been in the Steelers building, obviously spent time with the Eagles. It's just an intense place. I've never worked on Wall Street, but I've read enough articles and seen enough shows that kind of feels you're just, and that's kind of a Howie thing. I mean, Howie's just an intense, neurotic's the wrong way to put it, but he's just never settles. The
There's
way
a
they
lack
talk
of
about
organizational complacency, it seems like.
yeah, you hear that about like Belichick and Saban a lot. It's just an intense place. And there's a really, really, Tomlin says the standard is a standard. Well, it's not necessarily true anymore. And I think one pivot they made is, I know Jalen was a pretty big red flag, but they kind of built their entire team on like a bunch of TJ Watts and Minka Fitzpatrick's, so they pivoted hardcore of like super high character, good football players. And then they were equipped to take Jalen Carter, who has not been an issue for them.
Yeah.
And like, they don't really like the George Pickens stuff. Like that doesn't really happen for them.
Yeah, I guess AJ Brown has been whack-a-mole at times with some stuff popping up.
True, but but like sometimes like the quarterback, like that's just football stuff, like quarterbacks and wide receivers butt heads. Right. But he was an established like all pro, Sure. I mean, George Pickens would die to be like have his resume, Now listen, receivers are a little weird, so they're going to do, but there's a difference of like, is he just quitting or is he just mad at his quarterback?
Great.
So I think it just starts organizationally. There's just there's a lot of turnover there, and it's if you don't produce, there's like that. They just naturally will turn some stuff over.
And Pittsburgh's the antithesis of that, obviously, not just that head coach, but I mean front office, scouting.
Well, let's use the Carson Wentz example of when they pivoted off him and the Jalen Hurts draft pick, even the year before, that set that up. Like, would the Steelers have done that? No chance. I mean, most teams would not have.
Yeah. The only like facsimile there would be like, they cut bait with Kenny Pickett pretty quick 2 years in, but I mean, that was arguably a reach even at the time. That's not really hindsight or second guessing. A lot of people were like looking at
I'm talking about like have a guy who's really talented, give him a lot of money. And like it was really controversial at the time, and they're probably one of the few organizations, and Howie has this like walks this line, and he does it so well of being like, he's become a football guy over the course of his career, but he still has this like I would say analytical is the wrong way to put it, but like kind of Billy Bean, Daryl Morey, kind of like unemotional, will make crazy moves of like what is he doing? Yeah. And I think he, like, if you had a draft right now, every GM available in the NFL, I think even before this year, Howie would have been a lock top 5 pick. I think right now he'd be a no-brainer number 1 overall pick. I mean, what he's done. And so I think it really starts there. They are, I mean, the Eagles, I would say, really got put on the map of the Lurie era with Andy Reid. So they were a coach-centric place. And they've become more of like this collaborative kind of front office down through the coaches, where when I think the Steelers, like I think Tomlin and the Rooneys. Yeah. When you think the Eagles, you think Howie first, I would say, even over Sirianni. He's kind of the star of the organization. I often think about like that as the power of the NFL. Like you can, like in the NBA, your stars are your players. In baseball, your stars are the players. In football, like you could put coaches on billboards. Like you could, if it's like coming in Steelers versus the Ravens, like it can be Harbaugh and Tomlin, right? And the Eagles, you could throw Howie up there and everyone knows him. And that's, kind of shows the popularity of the NFL. But I think there's, complacency is not really allowed. I mean, they will just take constant swings at the quarterback. I mean, think how many quarterbacks they've had like post McNabb.
Well, to your point, like it's a little different than the Wentz situation, but a lot of people here are still, I don't know if bitter is the right word, because it's different to look back on it now with 4 years of evaluating what went on and what's transpired. But a lot of people still think the Steelers should have just moved on from Ben Roethlisberger before they did and just said, you know what? Thank you for your time and your service, franchise legend, but we've got to rip it up and move on. And maybe they stayed a year or two too long.
I do think that's I'll defend teams doing. I do think it's really, really difficult. I mean, because you'd say the Eagles, like they hold on to Brandon Graham, they held on to Fletcher Cox. Kelsey was still really good.
Yeah.
But once you like win big with like legendary players, they just get a little rope. Like,
people business.
If Travis Kelce wasn't Travis Kelce and he was just a good player and they had won with, but he wasn't like some legend Hall of Famer, like he would get cut this offseason.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes, and they'll cut anyone else in his shoes, but not him because he's Travis Kelce. So I think sometimes you saw with Eli Manning, the way that was handled at the end, it can just be clunky.
Yeah, that's kind of what I say when people bring up, like, why don't the Steelers just trade TJ Watt, get a king's ransom, and rebuild this thing? And I'm like, because this is still a people business. Like, he is still a beloved player here. And, like, it's easy to say it removed as a fan or a media member. It's like, but this isn't a video game. Like, if you're Art Rooney II, you got to live through doing that. And that would be.
And the whole point of the business is to draft and find TJ Watts.
Yeah.
Now, to me, the question, like with him specifically, has he hit the point of just a lot of wear and tear on the body? Is he not the same? And if you like to even entertain the Myles Garrett thing is coming up because he's legitimately asking for a trade. The Browns aren't like, let's get rid of Myles Garrett. Hell, they're like, hey, Myles, we'll give you $150 million. The Crosby thing is that organization's been so crappy for so long. You're like, you're not winning with the guy. The TJ thing, a big part of why they win 9-10 games every year is when he's healthy, he's like one of the best players in the league. But is he slipping a little bit? Is this as his best football behind? And that's the hard part about, NFL front offices and GMs is such a physical game. There's so much wear and tear. It can end pretty quickly in injuries. And I don't know, like brother to brother, but like for his brother, his body just started falling apart.
Yeah.
And, TJ's now had a couple injuries back-to-back years. He's so tough and he's so good. Like, don't get me wrong. He's one of my favorite players in the league when he's right. But like, these are the type conversations, even though like that's not really a Steelers type move. Like they're not going to do it.
Yeah. I've always said, like, if that were to happen, I think it would have to be them going to him and be like, hey, TJ, do you want to go somewhere else? And like, you think you have a better chance to chase a ring? Like, is that what you want? And from talking to him after the season, granted publicly, in front of a podium, like it doesn't sound like that at all. He still believes in Mike Tomlin and all those guys. So I don't think any of that's going to happen.
Well, if you're him, and I've said this about Mike Tomlin, like whenever the trades, teams clearly call around, Mike Tomlin would rather be the coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers than anyone else, right? So it's like, of course, like the Jags or the Bears call, like, yeah, he has a better job. Like he has to be forced to that. He's not coaching the Tennessee Titans here. So
they're not gonna just like ship him off too and be like, Mike, it's been a great 18 years. Thanks, dude. We'll see you around. Like that's just not
TJ Watt's the star player for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Like it doesn't get any better and paid a lot of money. Like he's not looking to leave. But like sometimes and that's the thing with Howie, like they just like seriously entertain all these things when you're not making. It'd be one thing if like, hey, listen, 2 years ago you made the AFC Championship game, a couple injuries this year is a weird year. It's like, no, you're not even close. So like you do a good organization and a forward-thinking organization. I think it is fair to say like you should have all these conversations. Like everything should be on the table. And that's where I would say with the Eagles, these conversations happen 365 all the time. I don't even know if they ever garner any traction ever inside. Like the one thing I've always said about working for an NFL team, like in a front office, like with talking with GMs and assistant GMs, like you're having the same conversations you would with your buddies. Yeah. Like it's just more real because that guy could pull the trigger. But it's like, I don't even know in the Steelers, like if they even entertain these kind of ideas that like the Rams entertain, the Eagles entertain, right? I know Andy Reid, like Andy's kind of a kid at heart. Like they love talking about this type of stuff. And Andy's history, he's made a ton of moves for 20 plus years, like crazy moves. You just watch the Steelers, like, it's the craziest thing they've ever done. Like, Minka Fitzpatrick was pretty bold because they had quarterback injury, I remember early. But, like, looking back, like, that's very Steeler type move, right?
Yeah. They hadn't traded a first-round pick in, like, 40 or 50 years or something. Yeah. So it was seismic. But I would say this past offseason with quarterback shuffle, because all of us here in Pittsburgh were like, well, this is the Steelers. They're going to at least run it back for one more year with Kenny Pickett, even if they do win 9 games again. But they took a bigger swing. I wonder how much of that is Omar Khan, stepping in for Kevin Colbert a couple years ago. And, to your point about the models of the organizations, if Omar Khan outlasts Mike Tomlin here, maybe they'll move to more of that, the way the Eagles do things. But
and
right
that's
now,
his background, right?
Yeah. It's just very
making
united
moves,
front.
doing deals.
Yeah. It's coach. Coach has the power in Pittsburgh, and that's the way it's been for a very, very long time with the Brunies. But well, hey, thank you so much, John. This was I know we went long, but this was great discussion. You want to tell people where they can find you if they enjoyed your insight on this?
Yeah, just the 3 and Out podcast. You can subscribe wherever you listen. Spotify, Apple, iTunes. My name is just my Instagram account, Twitter account.
Yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, there it is, right there on the screen.
We got a YouTube channel, put all of our podcast stuff up there. You headed to the Combine here in a week?
I think I'm sitting it out this year. But yeah, I mean, we've got the draft in Pittsburgh next year, so there's a lot of people are curious about that. Me personally, I'm like, it's still just reading names off of a card, but we'll see what happens.
Tomlin hasn't even talked at the Combine the last couple of years, has he?
I don't think he's talked at the Combine, John, since like 2010 or something. I mean,
that would be something if I was. Maybe you get a reprieve if you just were in the Super Bowl. Like, listen, you guys have been talking nonstop. If the GMs can talk, the coaches isn't. Like, this is the business we're in. Every coach and every GM should talk at this thing. Like, what are you really being at? Give me a break. Like,
yeah,
it's not just him. Like, Shanahan doesn't do it. Belichick didn't do it forever.
Yeah.
My thing is, Andy's talked like the last 6 years, and he's gone to 5 Super Bowls. So if Andy's up there, the rest of the league should be following suit.
Yeah, they kind of view it, I think, as like the GM is the voice of the team in the offseason, and the coach is the voice of the team in season. Like, you don't really hear from Omar Khan or Andy Weidel either between August and March.
So Omar will talk.
Yeah, he'll do the big podium thing with like anybody can walk up and ask about stuff, and then he'll do a little smaller session with the local media. So
I think it's such an easy. These coaches, I mean, they can do it in their sleep.
I know, especially with the way Tomlin, handles us throughout the season. He's been doing this longer than anybody right now in the league, at least in their current market. So, all right. Well, hey, for John Middlekauff,
take it easy.
Really appreciate you joining us. Yep. Take it easy, man. We'll see you.
See you.
Thanks to everybody else for watching today. We always appreciate you joining the show. And I think that was a really fun discussion with somebody who, no ties or connections really to the Steelers, but clearly follows the NFL closely, has been on the inside. And I thought it was great just to get some new ideas and some new perspectives from somebody who's not thinking constantly about Russell Wilson and Justin Fields day in and day out year round. So that was cool. I also want to tell you guys all about Goldberg, Persky, and White. If you were diagnosed with mesothelioma or lung cancer, call your local attorneys at Goldberg, Persky, and White. For more than 40 years, their firm has represented thousands of lung cancer and mesothelioma victims. Call 1-800-COMPLEX or visit gpwlaw.com for a free consultation. I'm Brian Batko. I'm out of here. We'll talk to you again later in the week on the North Shore Drive, Steelers mailbag. Appreciate you sticking around for a fun show. And as always, thanks for checking out Chipped Ham and Football.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.